Page Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Jones. I am with Singing News Magazine. My guest today, Arthur Rice of the Kingdom Heirs. Welcome, Arthur. Glad you're here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, busy time of year for the Kingdom Heirs. I don't know of a time when you guys are not busy.
No, not really. We're kind of busy all year. We take some breaks and here and there through the year, but for the most part, we're pretty busy.
Right. The Kingdom Heirs, of course, are known for their run at Dollywood every year. 36 years.
36 years.
Wow, that's a lot to be in one place.
It is.
How many shows a day is the group doing now?
Well, we're doing. They kind of last. With the COVID year, they kind of cut us back to. We would do 5 days, 3 programs a day, 2 or 3, kind of depend. And then, so during the COVID year, they kind of pulled us back to 4 days, but they put us at 4 shows and kind of shortened so about the same amount. But right now we're doing 4 days, and we're doing four 30-minute programs a day, and
so 16 shows in a week's time.
Yeah,
that's tough on a vocalist.
It can be. It can get tiring. We usually every 3-4 months, we take a good break and kind of get away from it. You have to, and because it can, you can get burned out. You just get physically tired, and especially vocally, especially on the tenor singers, especially. But it's good though. It's great. Great opportunity.
And then when the group is not in Dollywood, the winter months of every year, the group's on the road touring.
Yeah, that seems to kind of get shorter each year. When I first came with the group 26 years ago, we were on the road 4 months out of the year. And now, we do about 6 weeks in the wintertime, and that's about it, And which is fine, I like the road, but I like being at home too.
There's a lot to be said for being able to sleep in your own bed
every
night of every week.
Absolutely.
All right, so this year, or let's change that. The past 12 months or so, 15 months, little different scenario because of COVID. But also, things got very challenging for the Kingdom Heirs. Number one, Lauren Harris was involved in a very serious auto accident, took him out of the picture for a while. Then you had a tenor change.
Yep.
So walk us through what goes on in the minds of you and Chris French and all the other guys when you've got key players like a chessboard that's just been totally disrupted.
Yeah. Well, it helps to have a building full of talented guys that are just willing to do whatever needs to be done to get to move forward. Andy Stringfield, our piano player, there's so many times I don't know what we would do without him. I really don't. Not only does he play, but he can sing, kind of get through. So when Lauren had his car accident in January, he was out the whole winter. He went the first weekend, and that was it. And then he had his accident, and he was out. And then so it kind of fell on Andy to kind of fill that spot. And in that time period, we had a fill-in tenor, Dusty Barrett. Sings was sold out. It kind of worked out because a lot of the groups weren't singing that much, and so he was able to kind of go with us that winter while we were looking, for our full-time replacement. And so we had a tenor that we were kind of limited on what we could do song-wise, and then a baritone we kind of just threw in the spot, and so it was. It's been I tell you, this year, and then of course last year with COVID, we were probably one of the only working groups in gospel music, really, for the most part of the year. We started in the middle of June, and we worked pretty much the whole year. So that was a blessing, and it makes you grateful for the opportunity.
I remember talking to you somewhere along the way after things began to open up just a little bit. For the first time in 2 decades, really, the Kingdom Heirs were not inside a theater.
Yeah.
You had moved outside to the Valley Theater.
Back to the Valley Theater.
That's where it all began for the group.
Yeah.
That was quite an adjustment. It doesn't sound like much, but when you're used to singing inside in a very controlled environment, all of a sudden you're outside with a train going by, all that.
The pollen and the dust and the stuff that you forgot about.
Everything a singer wants.
Exactly. And it really was. I mean, it was kind of full circle when I first came with the group that, we sang outside during the summer or most of the year, and then we went in. We were able to go inside for Christmas, but for the most part, we were outside. And and then to be back outside after 25 years, it was interesting.
I'm sure
it was interesting.
But the neat thing about it, even though you were in a slightly different environment, you were still armed with a truckload of great songs.
Yeah.
And a lot of those songs have come from the pen of Diane Wilkinson.
Yeah.
What has made that relationship so enduring? I mean, you guys have been recording her songs now for a long time.
Yeah.
And it just seems like the material that she writes has Kingdom Heirs written all over it.
It really does. I don't know what really kind of Steve and I used to listen to the songs and stuff, and so he brought me a CD had about 6 or 7 demos on that songs that Diane had written, and about half of them had been cut by Gold City or Cathedrals or somebody, but we just loved the songs, and I think the fact that we never let the fact that somebody else cut a song keep us from cutting one if we liked it. Mm-hmm. And we cut a lot of other people's songs just because, we're fans of this music. I mean, we love great songs. And if it's a great song, I want to sing it, you know. And so that's never really kept us from cutting songs. And I think the fact that we were willing to do that, even knowing that, that we were probably the only ones going to get any use out of it, probably weren't going to get any radio out of it because the songs had already been used. But we made them ours. And we just kind of fell in love with her writing and her style. And so that kind of helped. I think that kind of helped that relationship. And then she started, kind of tailoring stuff toward us and sending it to us. And that's kind of when that relationship kind of started. And then, she'd send us 7 or 8 or 9 songs. We cut them all. Just they were great songs.
Yeah, a good song is a good song.
It is. It really is.
So even though you change very little from what you do at Dollywood versus a regular Saturday night concert somewhere, when you program in your head what you're going to do at Dollywood each performance, is there a certain go-to song that you have in the back of your mind that no matter how bad things might go wrong, or no matter where the makeup of the crowd has started, is there a song in your mind that you feel like is always the go-to song that will always work?
Sometimes. It kind of depends. Our crowds at Dollywood are a little bit different than our crowds on the road. Mm-hmm. Your typical church crowd or your typical Southern gospel music crowd, because they're kind of familiar with the styling. It still amazes me after all these years. Every day I ask how many people are seeing us for the first time, and it's still 70 or 80% of the crowd have never heard us, and we've been there for 36 years. And so the chances of them hearing other Southern gospel artists are even that slim,
right?
And so it's an opportunity for us to present our music to a crowd that really doesn't know our music. So everything is fresh to them, and so you kind of have to look at it a little different. You can't say, well, this works with our typical Saturday night crowd, like on the road or something, but it may not exactly work the same way because everything is fresh to them. Even the old songs are fresh to them.
In a lot of ways, that does take some pressure off, though.
It does. Yeah, it really does. And, we try to change up each program. We try to change up to where, we don't do the same thing. in case people want to come back and see us more than one time. And I think through the years that has helped our popularity with people, because they know that that they're not necessarily going to get the same thing. Even if they come tomorrow, it may be different. It may change. And the fact that we've done this so long that we can kind of work around just about anything. Just the other day we came in and we had been off on vacation. And for 10 days we came back, and our first program, we went out and did sound check before the program, and everything was fine. We walked on stage, and about halfway through the first song, everything went off. All the music, all the mics, everything. So then you go, okay, what am I going to do? Because you got a house full of people, and you're sitting there, okay, what do you do? So we stepped out on the front of the stage and sang 4 a cappella songs. And you got to have guys that are talented enough to do that, and our guys are just and they're willing to do whatever it takes to to make it through.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point. The guys that are in the Kingdom Heirs right now, I mean, they're just incredible at what they do. Dennis Murphy has been drumming for the group for so long we've all lost count.
This is his 30th year with the group.
30th year. Chris French playing the bass all along, and he's been there
40 years.
40 years. All right, and you've already mentioned Andy, great pianist, a good singer.
Yeah.
Vocally, Jeff Chapman. It's okay to call him a beast because he is a beast of a bass singer.
He is.
And then
really
Lauren Harris, one of the best baritones. You're a solid lead singer, have been for all these years. But there is a new face in the Kingdom Heirs now. Matter of fact, he's featured in the September issue of Singing News magazine, a brand new tenor for the group.
Yeah. It's funny. I was introducing him yesterday, and I told the people, I said, when we knew that, when Jerry Martin, he was with us for 10 years and decided to retire at the end of last year, and so we were going to, have to find a tenor, and I thought, well, that should be pretty easy, especially after the year we had and the groups, that were no longer singing. A lot of our groups are, just didn't come back, and so I thought, well, this should be fairly easy. It wasn't at all. For one thing, a lot of the guys that have been singing, when they're just like everybody. They had to find work, and a lot of them had already found another career or another line of work, and everything changed for everybody last year.
It did.
It was kind of like 9/11. When 9/11 happened, we lost our innocence. When last year when COVID hit, we lost our securities.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this a long time, and I've never been in a situation where I thought, well, I could go somewhere and sing. Not last year, not necessarily. I mean, I could always find a church or somewhere to go sing or whatever if I needed to or something.
No, all the avenues were blocked.
And that changes everything. And so I think it scared a lot of people. It scared, and it was a scary place. Mm-hmm. But we auditioned some great guys and some great singers. Just didn't quite fit. We just could not find the right one. And I mean, we were fixing to start Dollywood, and like I said, Dusty Barrett was filling in for us for the winter, but he was through. I mean, he was coming to the point to where he couldn't help us any longer. Mm-hmm. And I just prayed and asked the Lord. I said, I don't know who he is. I don't know where he's at, but you're going to have to send somebody because we've got to have somebody like in a week. And I called. I actually was in the studio and with Mike Speck, and I mentioned to Mike. I said, "Do you have anybody in mind? Have you seen anybody that might be interested?" And I really didn't want to. I really wasn't interested in hiring a kid. I've raised two boys, and I wanted somebody who knew what they were doing, who was kind of a veteran, could kind of step in there and do it. Well, Mike said, have you tried Lee University? Have you called Danny? And I said, no, I haven't. And so I picked up the phone as soon as Mike left the studio, and I called Danny and down at Lee University, and I said, Danny, have you got anybody down there that might be? And he said, give me 5 minutes, I'll call you right back. He called me back, and he said, I got your perfect kid. He said, he's fixing to graduate. I said, he loves Southern gospel music, kind of grew up in it. He's from Candler, North Carolina, just down there, and he went to my home church. And I said, well, how old is he? He said, he's 24. And I thought, oh, gosh. Here's a kid, don't know nothing. So I said, well, tell him to come up. Send him my address. I said, come up. I said, he doesn't have time to really learn any songs. I said, but just come up, and we'll just get around the piano and sing a few songs, see what you think. So he came up, but we sung a couple songs, and it was just like, it was just a God thing. I mean, it really was. I mean, it sounded good, it felt good. He's just a great kid. He loves the Lord, and he's just doing a fantastic job. Jacob Ellison is his name, and he's just doing a wonderful job. Yeah, he don't know all the songs. He doesn't know a lot of the old songs. Of course, a lot of the kids don't nowadays anyways. They're not like us. They didn't grow up in church singing them.
Right.
The hymns and that sort of thing. And so we're having to teach him a lot of stuff. And kids think about songs differently. They sing differently than when I was his age, They just think about songs differently.
But coming from where he was raised, Candler, North Carolina, which is basically a suburb of Asheville.
Yeah.
Western North Carolina is a hotbed for Southern gospel music singers. I mean, Kingsmen are from there, a Primitive Quartet, Inspirations. They're all located in Western North Carolina. And it's interesting that you're talking about Jacob as a kid, because I remember years ago there was a legend who would talk about you in the exact same way, and his name was Jim Hamill. You're one of those guys who traveled with Jim Hamill, and I say this lovingly, live to talk about it.
Yeah.
And you were a member of the Kingsmen for how many years?
I was there a little over 5 years. And it's so, when you're that young, it just seems like a long time, And when I look back at it now, it just seemed, that doesn't seem that long. But at the time, it just seems like that's a long time,
And you were there during some of the Kingsmen's biggest days.
Yeah.
Anthony Berger was playing piano. Yeah. Hamill was on the front line every night throwing his coat. Foxy was still, right in the middle of everything. Gary Shepard over on tenor.
Yeah.
Ed Crawford was singing baritone at the time. And Beaver was there, and Greg Fox on the drums.
Yep.
And you played bass.
Yep.
And you also hit the high notes for Hamill.
Right. So
when they hired you, did you really know what you were getting into?
I didn't. I really didn't. I grew up listening to those guys, and of course Ray is my cousin, and so when Ray started, my dad got Ray Dean started. That was the first group that he sang with, was with my dad, and when he got out of service. And then it kind of went from there. So Ray was always, we were always real close to Ray, and so anytime they were around, we would go. Foxy used to have the all night singings in Asheville. We used to go, there, and so I kind of got to know the guys kind of through the years, and of course as I got older, that kind of went away a little bit. But then, as I got a little bit older, like Squire and Mark Trammell, they went to my church, and Ernie Phillips, they all went to my church, and so I kind of got to know them there through the church, and then my singing career kind of came along a little bit, and I started singing with a group called the Gerald Payne Family. And I was with them for about 3 years, and that's really where Eldridge heard me. We sang with them at some fair in Mars Hill, and so that's when Eldridge heard me. And so But the rest of the guys kind of knew who I was. But that's the first time Eldridge that heard me. And I remember he called me on a Friday, and Friday afternoon he called me. He said, "Would you be interested in singing with the Kingsmen?" And of course that was a lifelong dream. I used to sit in front of we had one of those big console stereos, and I sat in front of the speaker of that console stereo, and I would play Kingsman albums, and I would sit there, and my bass guitar would plug into that. I don't know if anybody ever had one of those.
Wow. But
I would sit there in front of that speaker for hours and just play bass to every song. So I knew every song the Kingsmen ever did. So he asked me if I would be interested in saying. I said, "Well, sure, yeah," thinking there's no way, And he said, "Well, if you are, be in my office on Monday morning." And so okay. So I went over there, never expecting anything. And so that was when Wayne Maynard left, and he asked me if I'd be interested. I said, "Sure, I'd love. Just a lifelong dream." And he said, "Do you know any of our music?" I said, "I know everything you've ever done." And he said, "Well, great. Well, that's good." So he said, 2 weeks and it's yours. I said, still thinking there's no way this is ever going to happen. But I was 23, and I had no clue what I was doing, And but it was just the funnest thing I've ever done in my life, and just a great time. It was a great experience.
Did you actually rehearse with them, or did you walk on stage cold?
We got together. Elders called me. We got together the night before we left for my first trip at Eldridge's house, and Anthony came over, and Ray and Ed and Shepard came over, and we got around the piano and worked out one song for me to sing, and that was it. And the next day, I had to, we hit the stage running. That was it, And
what was the song?
"Whiter Than Snow."
Okay.
"Whiter Than Snow."
All right.
And that's the song that Eldridge heard me do, and he said, "I want you to do that." And so, of course, it was there was a big song for the Singing Americans, and just prior to that, but it gave me a song, and then we kind of went in the studio not too long after that and started recording. I did "Empty Vessel" was my first single. And so I felt very fortunate. That was, I wasn't there long, and I had they were good to me.
You were there, as I mentioned earlier. You were there during a very big time in the Kingsmen's career. You were there for stand-up.
Yeah.
And of course, those of us who've been in gospel music for a long time, we all, it's almost an unspoken thing that the Kingsmen were the masters of the live album.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were on what ultimately became Stand Up, the Live at Opryland album. What were the other albums during that time?
Let's see. We did Better in Person. That was the first one that we did. We did that in Missouri. And then Live in Mississippi. And then, let's see, Stand Up, and there's one more.
There's one more. You're right. We'll think of it in a few minutes.
I'm missing one. I can't.
But the Live in Mississippi was almost a makeup for. Well, let's go back and put it this way: the stand-up album Live at Opryland, USA, really was never planned. That was not supposed to happen.
It just happened.
Right.
We actually went. We were in Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. We were supposed to record that album in Jackson, Mississippi, and we did the whole album. We set up in Jackson that day, and at the Jackson Coliseum, they always had a ground problem, and it always took us forever to get rid of it. And so we set up that morning, and sure enough, there was a buzz in the system. It was a ground problem, and so we mentioned to the crew. They said, "Well, that's going to be a problem. We're going to have to get." "Well, it's no problem. We'll get to it." Well, they never got to it and never fixed it. And we recorded the whole thing with a buzz through the whole recording. It was on every track. So we realized, well, that's not going to work. So we were supposed to be in Opryland. Opryland had a Southern Gospel weekend. And, of course, that's when they had the Cumberland Quartet was there. That was their host group. And they had the weekend, had just everybody was there Saturday and Sundays. So we went to Opryland on Saturday. We're supposed to be there on Sunday also. Well, Chris White was, I think Kevin McManus, they were talking about how that, the Grand Ole Opry is dark on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And they thought, they've already got all the recording gear. All we have to do is just go in there and record. And so that's how that happened. I mean, they just opened the doors and the people came in, and from Opryland, and we had a full house, and we recorded that album. That it was it just happened that way, just in hours.
It's almost the accidental album.
It really is.
Speaking of that, Roy Acuff introduced the group that day, and if I remember right, the Kingsman is not what came out of his mouth the first time.
No, he introduced us as the Statesman.
Well, that's close. That's close.
Close. He was a true gentleman, man. I'm telling you, it was so good.
Yeah. Well, we are visiting with Arthur Rice of the Kingdom Heirs. We'll have more on the Fourth Page podcast. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Fourth Page podcast. I'm Danny Jones. My guest today, Arthur Rice of the Kingdom Heirs. Now, Arthur, a little while ago, we were talking about your days with the Kingsmen. And after you left the Kingsmen, there was a little bit of time there where you worked mainly in the studio and did some other things. And then came along an opportunity that most singers only dream about. How did Arthur Rice wind up at the Kingdom Heirs?
That was another kind of a right place at the right time kind of deal. I used to go to Dollywood just to get away, and I'd go over there, and I loved their singing. I loved the guys singing, and I just, I'd go to each program that, like I said, they were outside, and I'd go sit and just listen to them, and I thought, man, what a unique opportunity, not only to be home, but the fact that here's the whole world just walking right by you, just sharing Christ. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, this is really cool. And so, I kind of got to know Steve and Chris, and of course, I knew Chris actually when Chris played bass for Jerry Goff. That's when I really met Chris the first time. He played bass for Jerry Goff, and when I was with the Kingsmen. And so we kind of had that little bit of connection right there. And so I really knew him before I knew anybody. And then kind of got to know Steve and the guys, and I'd have lunch with them, and so Steve, kind of same thing. Steve called and said, "Hey, would you be interested in singing with the guys?" And I'm at the time, I was singing with Squire, but we weren't doing a ton of a ton of stuff. But I was singing with Squire and Ernie, and having a great time, and I said, well, never say never, and I said, sure, I'll come over and talk to you. So he actually came to the studio and brought David and Eric, and I couldn't get away, and they came to the studio that day for lunch, and we kind of got around the piano and sang a few songs, and he said, I'll be in touch with you. So he called me back, and he said, would you be interested? And I said, let me pray about that. And it was just kind of it was just one of those God things. He just put me in the right place at the right time, and it's been a great opportunity. It's I don't know why people ask me a lot of times, what is this to you? Is it, it's a great job. If you got to have a job, it's a great job.
Yeah.
But it's just the fact that the whole world comes to us. Mm-hmm. And literally, I mean, minus the COVID year, we would have guests from Europe or all over the world just come because it's Dollywood, right. And because of Dolly, they just want to come, and to have them come into our theater and us be able to sing the gospel, and if it would be easy for us to kind of put a little show together, or, something, and entertain them and that sort of thing, and that's part of it. But when you listen to our music, I mean, we don't cull anything.
No.
I mean, and Dollywood, I'll brag on Dollywood. They have never came to us and said, well, you can't say this, or you can't do this, or this song is inappropriate, or you can't. They've always just left us alone to be able to do, and that's allowed us to do what we feel like the Lord would have us to do. And that to me is the most important thing.
Well, you're planting seeds that not only may grow in Pigeon Forge area, but they're could possibly grow all over the world.
Exactly.
You just never know who you just sang to.
Exactly.
And the rewards of that, there's really no way of knowing until you're there.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible opportunity, and looking at it from a singer standpoint, from a technical standpoint, it's challenging. As we mentioned earlier, 16 shows in 1 week. That's a little bit tough. And the other thing too is the Kingdom Heirs songs, they're not pitched real low. No. When your lead singer actually should be singing tenor, I never will forget the day you called me and said, "Hey, I'm going to have to do a press release. Jerry's going to leave," and you had that little silence, and then you chuckled for a minute and said, "I guess I killed another one." So, but where does, for those viewers who want to know the technical standpoint of this, where does the tenor in the Kingdom Heirs, where is he normally riding?
Where does he have to live?
Yeah, where does he have to live?
Well, I tell you, it's over the years we kind of it's kind of come down a little bit. It's a little easier to sing them down a little bit, but I tell you, man, we've had some great tenors through the years, and they can tote the mail, but it's unfortunately, tenors a lot of times they don't last very long, but that's everywhere. That's everywhere.
Really.
It really is, and I'm very fortunate. I don't have any idea, why or how, my voice has lasted this long, singing that much. Other than, when I was growing up, my mom, she took me to voice lessons. I started voice lessons when I was 13, right after my voice changed. She took me to the voice teacher as my voice was changing. He said, give it 6 more months, and then when his voice settles, then bring him back. And I took voice for 7 years. And she took me back and forth until I was old enough to drive myself every week.
Wow.
Every week. And she prepared me. She gave me that opportunity to prepare myself.
There is no substitute for learning how to sing properly.
No, there really isn't. There really isn't. And that's I really, other than the Lord, I think that's what's saved me over the years is having that technique. And of course, like I said, I started as so young. When I started with the Kingsmen, and people come, these young kids would come to me and they say, "How do you do this?" or "How do you sing this way?" I really had to stop and actually think about, okay, how do I do this? Because it had become such second nature that I really didn't know how to describe to somebody how I did this. Now, over the years, I've kind of remembered.
So not only do the Kingdom Heirs sing high, they can hold out a note
we
too.
Sing long.
You sing long too. I have watched this many times. Of course, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of music that I so enjoy, but I can't sing a lick. But I enjoy watching the audience's reaction to stuff that I know you just don't do. It takes effort. For example, holding out the last note of a song for what seems to be an eternity sometimes. You don't do it on every song, obviously, but there are 2 or 3 times in a Kingdom Heirs program where that last note goes on and on and on, and you can watch the audience. They're just like, "Oh my goodness, where did that start?"
It's funny. It really didn't. As a singer, when you're surrounded by great singers, there's a sound, there's a blend that happens, and there's a tone that whenever it locks in, when you get those four parts just locked together, it's the sweetest sound you could ever hear, and you don't ever want to let go of it. And that's kind of where it starts. It's just a straight tone. Everybody's just locked in, and it's just it really is. It's hard to really explain it, but it's so good you just don't want to let go.
Right, and what's amazing about it is, the tendency would be for somebody to run out of air or fall off the note.
Yeah.
No, not in the Kingdom Heirs. It's solid all the way to the last end. Everybody's left the building; they're still there. But that's great. But that is such a selling point, if you will, for our music. Stuff like that. I mean, you're right. The sound of that blend, the sound of that harmony, it will catch you. It will stop you in your tracks.
Yeah.
And that's such a great thing. One more question about Kingdom Heirs. A few years ago, very unfortunate passing of Steve French. That opened up a slot that you may not realize was coming your way, and that was to be the front man of the Kingdom Heirs. How do you feel about that particular role?
I don't know.
It's a fair answer.
I really, it's one of those things that just happened. I had the opportunity to work behind two of the greatest MCs that I think ever stepped on a stage, and that was Jim Hamill and Steve French. Steve was a master.
Yes, it was.
At it. Part of it was because he'd done it so long, but boy, he just knew how to communicate with an audience. It's totally different than what Jim did, but it was a mastery, and I never really dreamed that it would ever come about. It just happened, and it's funny. It was like, for so many years I was kind of the go-to guy, for Steve, whatever, and most of the songs, a lot of our great songs, I had the privilege of singing those, and so when it changed to me being MC, I changed positions to being a cheerleader, and I just love it. I love standing behind some of the greatest singers that ever stepped on the stage and just letting them do their thing. I love that. And in fact, one of the best compliments I think I've ever gotten, I had a guy come up to me the other day after one of our programs. He said, "Man," he said, "I've been watching you." He said, "You're the best cheerleader I've ever seen on stage." And that meant a lot to me.
That's a high compliment.
It is. And so I don't know. It's like my position changed in what I do, and I don't sing as much as I used to. I don't care. I don't want to. I want these guys to, I want to push them out there in front. I want to feature them, and I want to show them off because they're great, and I love doing that. I love doing that.
That mentality is one reason why you've been so successful in your other full-time, non-full-time job, and it's serving as president of the Southern Gospel Music Association. And, you've been in that role now for quite some time.
Yeah, that's another one of those things that's just happened. I really didn't, I really never saw myself in that role, but God has opened those doors, and I love this music. I've always been a fan of this music, and I love the history of the music, but I love the future too, and I love encouraging young people. And I love encouraging them with the past. To say, "Hey, listen, go back and listen to this." That's one cool thing about of Jacob, with him being young. I pull stuff up that he's never heard, and let him listen to it, and he's like, wow, that's so good. But if we didn't have that, if that wasn't available for us to educate the young people coming up, and so we want to preserve the past so that we can encourage the future and know where we're going with our music. And so it's a little, this past year has been a little different. For those of you who don't know, the Hall of Fame closed at Dollywood. It was, it's just the COVID year. It was like it affected everybody. It affected everybody's wallet, and we knew at some point that Dollywood was going to move us to a different place in the park, simply because the logistics of where we were at were where 20 years ago hadn't really been thought about. But the only expansion area was where our building is at. Right. So we knew at some point they were going to build us another place and move us somewhere else. Well, because of the COVID and the loss of the money and all that kind of stuff and the income, they didn't have the money to do that. And so, am I sad about it? I'm sad because it's an end of an era. I'm excited to the point to where I'm excited about what God has next for us. Is it going to be the same thing? Probably not. But I know whatever it is, it'll be what He wants for us to have, and it will be right for what's coming.
One thing I've noticed that's transpired within the Southern Gospel Music Association, especially since the COVID hit, the closing of the Hall of Fame and Museum, the people who are involved in the SGMA, and by that I mean the people in the industry who are in it, all of a sudden it wasn't bad before, but now there's a renewed, okay, we need to help each other. We need to really work hard to keep this thing going, so all the work that the people who brought us to the dance, we can keep showcasing. The unity, if you will, seems to be stronger now than perhaps no other time than maybe when all of this launched 2 decades ago. Is that a fair statement?
That is. I love it, yes, and you were exactly right. It's everybody that's involved in the SGMA and outside, it just really gotten behind us, and just really are working toward one goal, and that's promoting our music and the message, and I love that. And if that's what had to be, the closing of this to pull us together, then that's exactly what.
Sometimes it takes a little bit of rain to get sunshine.
Exactly.
So maybe that's what's happened here.
Yeah.
Our guest today has been Arthur Rice of the Kingdom Heirs, the Southern Gospel Music Association. Arthur, thank you for coming by. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for the next episode of the Fourth Page podcast. Always a great guest. We'll have